Welcome everybody to the workshop today. I'm really happy to have everybody here, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you some things that I hope will be really helpful on your journey to truly overcome pornography use and repair your relationship. So if you're new here, my name is Sam Tielemans. I'm a licensed therapist, and this is my area. This is all I do, is just work with people who are struggling with this issue to help give them the tools that they need to actually find freedom. So today I'm really excited to share with you this workshop. I gave this workshop recently to a separate group. Somebody asked me to come speak to their group, and their feedback was really positive. So I wanted to share this with you because I feel like this is such an important topic. So what I'm going to do is share with you these tools and ways to help you guys overcome the urges that you might be having. And then at the end, if there's any questions, or even in between, I love questions. My goal is to make this as applicable as possible. And so if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'm happy to answer those as well. So like I said, today's workshop is going to be all about helping you overcome the urges for pornography and not needing willpower or discipline. So I truly want to help you overcome the urge instead of having to resist it. So I need you to know, first off, that there's hope. There are so many good things that you can do to actually overcome this issue. And so I want to jump right in and share with you this overview of what we're going to cover today. There is a very specific way to help you actually remove urges instead of getting better at resisting them. It's a really simple process that you can use literally starting today to identify and resolve the root cause of your issues so that then the urges go away. You actually can live a life without these nagging urges in the back of your mind, without having to resist or without having to be hypervigilant. Sometimes I work with guys, and as I'm working with them in my program, they'll tell me in the very beginning, I just want to feel normal. Whatever normal is, I think I know what I mean. When they say that, I think I know what they mean by that. It's they don't want to have to deal with this forever. They don't want to have to think about this. They don't want to have to worry about it. It's just living their life. And how you can actually achieve that result is by doing what we're going to be talking about today. The first thing that I need you to know is that if you are feeling an urge, there is always a reason. I had a call with somebody earlier today, actually. He called and reached out and said that he'd been doing everything he could possibly think of. He did a 2-week intensive. He met with multiple therapists. He's in a group right now. He's desperate to figure out, how do you overcome this issue? And when I asked him, well, what's your biggest challenge on this journey? He says, when I feel this urge, I just don't know how to overcome this. I don't know how to, I keep falling into this temptation, even though I'm trying desperately to not. And so what I shared with him briefly what I'm going to talk about today, which is there's always a reason for the urge. It might seem like it comes out of nowhere, but there's always a reason. And today I'm going to share with you how you can identify where the urge is coming from, because once you can then actually do something about it. I like to use this analogy of all these check engine light, different little symbols that might show up on your dashboard. When you're driving a car, imagine being a brand new, you got one of your kiddos, or you as a 16-year-old, you're out driving, and let's say you're in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden, this light flips on. Number 25 out of the list of all these, right? Number 25 flips on. If I'm looking at this light, I have zero clue what this could possibly mean. I have zero idea. And that's a really big problem, because if you don't know what this means, how do you know how to fix it? If this means change your brakes, then it becomes easy. Okay, cool. I'll just get the right tools and change my brakes. But if I don't know where to start, then I'm flying blind. And any solution I try to come up with is very likely going to miss, because this is indicating there's a very specific issue happening in the car. So if you're like me, I have no idea what cars, I don't know anything about cars. My father-in-law is a real big car guy. He had me change the oil for my first time, and I'm 39 years old. I literally know nothing about cars. So I'm the kind of person who puts a piece of duct tape over the engine light, hoping that it goes away when I peel it back off. Again, this is an issue, because if you don't know what it means, how are you going to resolve it? So I'd like to then illustrate that every single one of these symbols means something specific. So if you take your car to the mechanic and they have the blueprint, they have the owner's manual, and they know how to read these symbols, it's so basic for them to recognize, oh, this symbol right here means you need an oil change. This symbol right here means that your transmission the fluid needs to be changed. This symbol here, oh, that just means your tires are low. How you approach the issue depends 100% on what the problem is. So at the very bottom of this diagram here, it tells you, it translates, what's this symbol mean? This is actually what each of those mean. This is such a necessary component for not only cars, but even more so with people. I use this analogy to illustrate that urges work the same exact way. Urges are just signals. They're just messages. They're telling you that something needs attention. It's not that you're bad if you have an urge. A lot of guys feel bad about themselves and they think that urges mean they're still not doing well. Urges mean that they're no closer to finding freedom than when they started. Urges mean fill in the blank with any kind of negative belief or association that somebody makes with it. The key is to recognize that you're not bad for having an urge. It doesn't mean you're not doing a good job. It simply means it's sending you a message. So your job is to figure out what that message is trying to tell you. Just like the check engine light. What's that mean? Because once you recognize, oh, this urge is just telling me something needs attention, now we can solve it. Now we can get out ahead of it, which is actually what I told the guy I spoke with today. I said, if you're always behind the 8 ball and you're having to play catch up and resist, if the urge has already happened and you're trying to resist it, it's already too late. Can you resist it? Sure. But then the next day it'll be there. If you resist it successfully that day, then the next day it's going to be there. They don't let up until you figure out why they're happening and solve it. So this helps you to get out in front of the urge so you actually can find some closure. The urge reveals the root cause. And this is so key, is that we want to understand our urges, not run away from them. By getting understanding, instead of pushing them away, this is how you can find this freedom that we were talking about earlier on today. I want to give you this framework. This is the meat of the presentation that I hope is going to be really helpful for you. I want to give you this framework that can help you identify where these urges are coming from. Because so often I'll ask a husband that I'm working with, I'll ask a guy, hey, do you know what your triggers are? Do you know where these urges are coming from? And they're like, I have no clue. I just know that I feel, if I'm alone, then I feel it. If I'm stressed, then I feel it. I want to give you a blueprint that's proven that you can apply to every single one of your urges so that you can understand the source to know how to resolve it. And these are the 3 categories. When you put it into categories, it becomes infinitely easier to learn how to read them. So I want to give you some examples in each one of these categories. Then I'm going to give you some tools that you can apply for each category. So depending on where the urge is coming from, you have some direction as to know how to solve it. The first one that I want to share is coping. This is the most common one. Coping from some kind of a negative feeling underneath the surface, as I've listed here. Above the surface of the iceberg is the behavior. And so many guys try their very best to push the iceberg underneath the surface. They're suppressing and resisting, which makes sense why they would do that, because obviously, as you know, this causes a tremendous amount of pain in your relationship. It creates a heavy sense of guilt and shame. It impacts you personally. It for many people impacts them at work or spiritually. That causes so much damage in your relationship. This is costing you so much in your life, your peace, your happiness, your relationships, your trust. The cost to struggle with this issue is immense. And so I respect people who are working on this. I respect that people are trying and they're trying to push away the urge, but if that's all they know how to do, this is why they get stuck in this loop. So it's key to recognize that underneath the surface, when you're struggling with an urge because of coping, it's because of some underlying uncomfortable or painful emotion. Depression, low self-worth, insecurity, anxiety, stress, all of the stuff that you see there. And what happens is that when you feel the pressure of that feeling, and if you have developed this habit or pattern of turning to pornography to get away from your feelings, it's a momentary reprieve. For just a little bit, you can distract yourself from how bad you might be feeling in that moment. And if this pattern has been happening for a long, long time, then it just gets wired in. And through repetition, the brain sends urges to you in the form of a message that I'm in pain, I'm feeling lonely, therefore, I want to push this away, suppress it, numb it out so I don't have to worry about it anymore. So if you're coping and the urge is coming from that category, it's telling you that there's some underlying uncomfortable or painful emotion that you're struggling with or feeling at that moment. So the goal isn't to push it away, it's to translate, okay, I feel this urge. Let me decode, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling this? Because this is what's driving the urges. So what do we do then if we're struggling with this coping category? What are some tools? Here are some things that I want to share with you. Step number one is to reflect and to think about what you're feeling. Like I said earlier, urges are just messages. Doesn't mean you're bad. It just means there's some feeling underneath the surface that doesn't feel good that your brain is trying to get you out of. And if by lots of repetition, it knows that if you watch pornography, you don't feel so bad, it's going to send you that urge. It's going to trigger that urge. So the first step is to identify what you're feeling and why you're feeling it. After you've done that, it then reveals what tool to apply in order to resolve that situation. And self-compassion in this process is going to be the thing that helps carry you as you're learning the skill to identify how you feel and match the right tool to the right issue. I've got a couple of little kids that are, one's in preschool, one's in elementary school. And so my preschooler comes home and he has this worksheet. And on one side of the worksheet, it has the colors, like it's like green, red, yellow, blue. Then on the other side of the worksheet, it's got the first letter of the name of the color. They're teaching him letters and colors and matching. So all he has to do is take the color green and draw a line all the way down to the letter G. And then the color yellow, match that all the way up to the letter Y. This is the same process. And once you know what you're feeling and then have a collection of tools to deal with each of these issues, it's simply a game of matching. It's not some overwhelming thing. This issue for so many people is exhausting for them. But using this framework can help simplify it so it doesn't have to be overwhelming. It can actually be so simple that when you discover, oh, this is what this urge is trying to tell me, this is what I'm feeling. And if I'm feeling this, so let me give you an example. Let's say shame. Let's say you notice that you're feeling bad, you make a mistake at work, or your wife is critical of you, or you slip up again in this issue. Let's say there's a situation like that, and then the inner critic jumps in and tells you how awful of a person that you are. It tells you that you're a failure. You're never going to be able to get this right. Your wife is never going to be happy with you. It doesn't matter what you try. It's never going to be enough. That's the shame voice. So often when people feel shame, that's when the urges come in. They want to get out of how bad they feel because, of course, if somebody's being hard on themselves, it feels awful. To have low self-worth is crushing. And I personally felt this sense of like, when I was growing up, when I was struggling with shame and didn't know it, I thought it was guilt. I just thought like, oh, I made a mistake and I feel bad. But the reality was I was actually feeling a lot of shame. I just felt like a bad kid. I would make a mistake, feel bad, feel like I need to hide it, try to act perfect because if I was perfect, then people would accept me. Like all these things develop as a way to combat shame, but the goal is to eliminate and resolve shame. So if you feel this urge and you trace it all the way down into shame, and it's this inner critic that tells you you're bad or you're not enough, then there's a lot of good tools that you can use to help you resolve shame. How you approach shame is very different than how you approach loneliness. How you deal with and resolve shame is very different than how you deal with stress. So this is the value of doing this work. It's figuring out what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, and then matching it with the right tool. So just as a sidebar, one of the best things that you can do if you're struggling with shame is to learn the skill of externalizing the situation away from you and making whatever problem or challenge you're experiencing about the situation. So let me give you an example of this and apply it to the next example here, the marriage disconnection. So let's say you and your wife are not getting along and she doesn't trust you, and then she doesn't want to be intimate. She doesn't really want to have conversations with you. And when she does, she's upset with you. So if you're disconnected in your marriage and you're feeling lonely, again, that's one of the elements underneath the iceberg. Loneliness hurts. We're not meant to live alone. We're not meant to live in disconnection. So it hurts. We want to get away from that. So let's say you not only feel loneliness, but you also feel shame, like I have at the bottom of the slide here. So how do you apply this tool of shame? Well, if your wife is critical with you and she's mad, shame will make you take it personally. She's mad, I'm a bad husband. She's mad, I'm a failure. The way you interpret the situation depends on whether or not you take it personally. So if I take it personally and I think I'm just this bad kid, or my wife is mad, I'm a bad husband, that is making it about me. That's shame. The antidote to shame, one of the simplest ways to combat this, is to recognize it's not about me. My wife is mad because she can't trust me because I've brought pornography into the relationship. She's mad about the pornography usage. She's not mad because I'm a bad husband. Again, shame will make you think it's you when really it's not. It's about the situation. So the more you match, again, that shame problem with the right tool, which is externalizing it and recognizing I'm struggling with this issue because I need to learn better emotional management skills. Now it's about the situation. It's about learning how to manage your feelings more effectively. That's so different than I'm a bad husband. So this is how you can apply this tool, this outline that I've shared with you. When you're having an emotional, overwhelming reaction, what are you feeling? Why are you feeling it? Then match that tool with the right approach. If you're lonely, connection is the answer. If you're stressed, then decompress or resolve the issue that's overwhelming you. If low self-worth, it's build your self-worth. It just is the matching game, but you can't match it unless you figure out what it is that you're feeling. So I hope that makes sense. Anybody, if there's any questions, please drop those in the chat here and I'm happy to answer those. But that's category number one. So of the three categories of urges, we've covered coping. I want to go over the next two here. The next one is habit. Again, this is a great, this is why I really like this framework, because you can assess, I have this urge, where is it coming from? Instead of thinking like, I have no clue, I just feel bad, I feel this urge, I don't know what's going on. You can put it and reflect on these three categories. So this is category number two. Many of you have likely heard of this researcher, Ivan Pavlov, who was a researcher who brought in a set of dogs that he wanted to see if he could train. So Pavlov's dog experiment is this like groundbreaking psychological study. And the short version of what he did is he took a dog and brought food to the dog. And naturally, when the dog sees food, he starts to salivate because he recognizes what food is. He knows that it tastes good. So there's a physiological reaction to the food. That's before conditioning the dog. The next step number two, the top right here of the slide, he took a bell, a tuning fork, and he'd ring the bell. And then he'd watch the dog. And of course, when a dog hears a bell, nothing happens. It's just a bell. But this is where he wanted to take this experiment and see if he could condition or pair the sound of the bell with food to see if there was a reaction then to the bell itself. So that's what he did. He took the bell, the tuning fork, he'd ring it at the same time he'd give the dog food. So he'd hear the sound and it would be paired with food, which would make him salivate. You do this dozens and dozens and dozens of times. What happened was he took away the food and all he did was simply ring the bell and the dog started to salivate because he anticipated what that meant. He anticipated where this was going. I'm going to get food, so my body reacts. This is what happens when you experience triggers and urges. I cannot stress this enough. If you're struggling with urges for pornography, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you have this big character defect and there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean you're an addict, right? That's such a disempowering label that people put on themselves. It doesn't mean anything. It simply means, it doesn't mean anything about you. It simply means that you have been conditioned or there's been a trigger that's been associated with pornography use. That's why you feel the urge. And when guys struggle with this issue, these urges are involuntary. The dog couldn't decide to not salivate. Once it had been conditioned, it just was automatic. This is what happens when you're feeling urges. There's nothing wrong with you. Again, please hear what I'm trying to say. There's nothing wrong with you. This is an issue that can be 1000% resolved. It's just a matter of conditioning. So when the dog hears the bell, he salivates just because they have been associated together now. So how does this apply to you? It applies in a very big way. Many people have associations with any number of things that are listed here on the slide and lots of other things. Let's say you're home alone. If that's a trigger for you, that just means that being alone is now associated with pornography use. So that when you're alone, the brain sends the signal to your body, now's my chance. I can look something up. I'm alone, because that's how it's played out dozens and dozens or hundreds of times. So through association, being alone triggers the urge. They're paired together. Same thing, being awake late at night. You're on your phone. I'm bored after work. Seeing an attractive woman, whether you're watching TV, scrolling Instagram, all of these things are potential triggers. So when you recognize that there's nothing wrong with you, and it's just a matter of association, and those things are just paired together, the goal is to break those links. And so when you recognize that you can actually break the links, before I actually go to the slide, let me just explain one more thing. The goal is to break the link because you can recondition yourself. This is why I want people to know there's so much hope. There's so many good things that you can do to resolve this issue. You don't have to battle against urges. All we want to do is recondition these triggers so that they're no longer triggering. So they no longer are connected to a sexual urge. Because how many times, so the goal, again, as I'm working with people in the process that I have, as we break all these links, you can then be home alone for 3 months with every electronic device fully accessible. If being alone and a sexual urge is not paired together, you can be alone and there's no problem. If they are paired together, now you're in the mode of battling and resisting, and it's a losing battle because urges don't let up. Associations are there. You can't overpower them. But if you break the link, and emotionally, psychologically, those are no longer connected through reconditioning, then you can be alone forever, and it's not linked to any kind of an urge. Same thing with all these other ones, being awake late at night, bored after work, seeing an attractive woman. It doesn't really matter what it is. The goal is to break the link so you can actually be free. So how do you do that? If it's on the habit level, if it's on the emotional level, how you break the link is to resolve the emotional issue. If you're lonely, you develop skills and patterns of being able to connect and get your needs met. If you're in shame, you develop self-compassion and self-confidence. If you're stressed, again, on and on and on. On the habit level, how do you break this? First, you identify. You need to have clarity about what your trigger actually is. If you're awake late at night and you don't know that that's the triggering situation, that bell, as it were, is still firing off outside of your awareness. The bell, the situation activates that response in your body, even if you don't know it's happening. The brain is so powerful, and most of what we do is subconscious. When's the last time you had to actively focus on how to brush your teeth, on how to pick up a fork, on how to drive a car? We don't think about that once we learn that skill. Once we learn how to do something, it goes into our subconscious, so we can do the thing while consciously thinking about something else. So that's a good thing. But what's not a good thing is if unhealthy habits go into our subconscious mind. Then we're operating on these old patterns that we don't want in our life, but they're below the surface. So we're consciously trying to change them, but that conscious change doesn't resolve the underlying issue if you're not actively addressing it. So step number 1, identifying what specifically the trigger is. When is it happening? Number 2, what would you like to do instead? And then number 3, having intention to then follow through. So let me give you an example of this. Let's say, again, going back to this situation here, let's say being home alone is a trigger for you. So if I was in your shoes, I guess this is, again, I can give you so many client examples too. So I've worked with so many people where being a home alone is a problem for them. So one of the clients that I was working with, his wife would work late at night. So he would get off at like 5 and she would not get home till like 10. So he'd have 5 hours of just quiet time. So when he would get home, just entering his house would remind him, oh yeah, I'm alone. And then the thought would come in, oh no, like I'm alone. It's like, oh, I'm alone. It's like, oh no, I'm alone. And then the thought would come in. It's like, well, don't screw this up. You've already told your wife you weren't going to do this anymore. But this thought of like, yeah, but I'm alone comes in. And now there's this battle you're resisting. I know I shouldn't do this, but there's a part of me that's curious. I know I shouldn't do this. Maybe I'll just get on my phone and check my email. Maybe I'll just look around on social media, pass some time while I eat. I know I shouldn't do this, right? This push pull, I don't want to say it's too late, but you're already in the battle. And it's inevitable at some point that the urge is going to win because it's stronger than your willpower. Urges are not defeated by willpower. So I hope that you're, again, making these links that it's not about resisting the urge. It's about identifying and recognizing where it's coming from. So let's say it's just the habit. Let's say you're having a good day and it's not an emotional coping mechanism. You get home, you're awake, you're home alone. The thought comes in because those are paired together. What we want to do is then have clarity. Okay, just being home alone is the thing that triggers it. So what do I want to associate with being at home alone with? So what he decided to do was he wanted a new routine. When he walked in, the thing he would look forward to is playing his guitar. So he started to consciously associate, when I'm alone, I can blare my electric guitar and I'm not bothering anybody. So he started to consciously pair being alone with, I get to do something that I love. And then he would visualize when he's coming home, he would see his guitar. He'd think about the song he wants to play. He'd imagine himself playing. He'd hear the music in his head. He'd put himself in that state that activated that excitement so that when he got home, he was already preset. He was already conditioned that I'm going to jump right into my guitar and enjoy my day. By doing that, by replacing the old pattern with being at home alone and then getting on his phone, I'm at home alone. That's fine. I don't need a babysitter here. I just need to pair being at home alone with something else and then link in this emotional reaction that's positive to it. So when he did that, that is what broke the links. So when he got home, that just became his new routine. And because he had done all the emotional work on the emotional coping side, that's what allowed this habit to stick. So often people use habit level tools, like surface level tools, to deal with emotional level problems. They don't match. It's not going to work. So if you think to yourself, well, I've tried that before. I've tried to put new routines in place. I've tried to do new habits, but they don't stick. That likely means you're using a habit level tool to address something that isn't on the habit level. It usually means you need to go deeper or figure out what other category it's in so you can resolve that. And then these habits will actually stick. Then you can follow through much more easily because you've resolved the underlying reason why it's happening. So let's assume you've already done the emotional work. And if you haven't, that's step number one. Doing the emotional work is your biggest lever to finding freedom. Then the habit level. That's where you pair old triggers, old situations with new routines, new patterns, new habits. So that's addressing this on the habit level here. So we've covered coping. That's our biggest one. That's why I put that one first. That's the most essential, doing that emotional work. Number 2, habit level. And then lastly, number 3, what if it's just a normal physical drive? And for a lot of people, that's all it is. After you've addressed these two things, if you still feel these urges, it's likely because it's just a normal drive. There's nothing wrong with that. How do these drives happen? Well, sometimes we have sexual thoughts. Sometimes we have sexual feelings because it's like the timeline or a biological clock. After a certain amount of time, period of days, or whatever it is, that feeling surfaces because we are sexual beings. And then thirdly, sometimes we'll feel physiological desire or urges, or our sexual desire will notice that that's activated when we see visual cues. All 3 of these reasons for our normal physical drive are completely healthy. They're totally normal. So often guys will demonize themselves. I want to touch on this here. The first one. So many men will demonize themselves for having sexual feelings, and they misinterpret them. And they think, well, if I'm having this feeling, that means I must not be doing my work. That means I must not be doing a very good job, or I'm still struggling and I'll never get over this. See, look, I have all these urges and I don't know what to do with them. Assuming you've already solved the first 2, addressing the emotional side, developing the skills that you need. It's about skills. It's skill training, right? It's not some personal massive character defect. That's the old model. The old model is you're deficient and you have this problem that you have to manage. That's the old school way of thinking. That's not true. This new approach, this new model is there's nothing wrong with you. It's just indicating you need to develop skills, as we all do. And once you develop that skill, the problem goes away. So many guys linking this to this third category here, normal sexual drive. So many guys shame themselves right here. How do you address this? By recognizing that there's no need to fear your sexual feelings. There's no need to avoid them. There's no need to feel bad about them. So many men feel bad about them. It's critical to recognize. There's a researcher who I like who wrote a book, and in it, so the book is called Come As You Are, and it's a book about helping couples repair their sexual relationship. It's more for women, but it more helps to explain a female, like because men and women are different sexually, as you probably know. And what happens in the brain is different. What happens in the body is different. And so she talks about female sexual response in the book. In it, she references a research paper where a couple of researchers developed a new model to describe our sexuality, and they call it the dual control model. So what that means, in short, is that they discovered that our sexual system is always on. There are just accelerators and brakes. There's accelerators like visual cues, right? A visual cue is an accelerator. It activates, or it's like it amplifies, it sends a signal, right? Our antenna is always on. So when something comes into the path on the frequency of that, when there's a situation, a thought, a visual cue, a conversation, media, whatever it is, when that comes into this sexual channel, our antenna picks up on that and our body responds to it. So the researcher said that our sexual system is always on. So when you're presented with sexual content, you will have a physical reaction. It is automatic because you're a sexual being. So many men don't understand that. They shame themselves for having these desires. So step number one is to recognize there's nothing wrong with urges. Like I said earlier in the presentation, urges are just messages. And sometimes the message simply is that image, that person, that thought activates this sexual system. That's it. It's attractive, it's desirable, you're curious about it. All of those are normal, healthy reactions. So it's so important that you hear this to recognize you don't have to be hard on yourself when you have an urge. It just means it might be coming from, I'm having a hard day. It might be a habit, or it just might mean you're human. And when you can normalize your urges, it helps to release the shame on them, which helps you to get out of this cycle where you fall back into it. You have an urge, you feel bad about it. Now that you're feeling bad, you want to get out of how you feel bad. You want to get out of this negative feeling, and then you act out on it, and then you feel bad because you just acted out, and you beat yourself up, and then you're in this loop. That's how this happens. So not shaming yourself is so critical. Number two, mindfulness. Let's say you have an urge. Mindfulness is a fancy way of saying, it's more of like I don't know, like this pop psychology word now. It's like trendy to say mindfulness. Mindfulness simply means being aware. So when you have a physical drive, a physical urge, and you take a step back and just think about it, you're not thinking about the movie in your head, right? Because if you think about and dwell on it, those feelings become more and more intense. You just reflect on how your body feels after you've been presented with this cue. So if there's a sexual cue, whether it's a thought, whether it's an image or whatever, you check in with your body and you think, what's happening? Well, my chest feels a little bit tighter. My heart rate increases. I feel this boost of adrenaline. There's this anticipation. That's just dopamine. Again, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just dopamine. That's a dopaminergic reaction. So when you just are mindful or simply just reflect on that, it's almost like our awareness is like a flashlight. We can only think about one thing at a time. So if I see an attractive woman at the store and I think about her and I think about something inappropriate about her and I start to fantasize and objectify her, my flashlight is on that movie in my head. And if that's what I'm thinking about, it will release dopamine in my body. It'll release this physiological reaction. My desire for sexual intimacy will increase because that's where my flashlight is. But if I notice an attractive woman at the store and my body responds to that and I think, oh, she's really attractive, I haven't crossed any lines. I'm just aware that this person's attractive and my body is responding to that. That is normal. It's healthy. That's how it's supposed to be. The key is just, what do you do with that? Do you choose to fantasize and objectify and have this movie playing out in your head and you're entertaining and fueling the movie? That's where it crosses this line for many of you, right? If your value is, I don't want to entertain those thoughts. I want that. I want my sexual desire to be channeled towards my wife. I don't want to entertain and fuel these thoughts about somebody else. That's where the line is. So just because you notice somebody's attractive, fine, great. There's attractive people everywhere. It's now I'm going to take the flashlight of my attention, and instead of watching the movie in my head, I'm simply going to shine the flashlight onto my body and notice. I'm going to do a body scan and think, what's happening? Well, my heart rate increased. I feel this adrenaline in my arms. I feel this tightness in my chest. It's like my body. So you're coding how you're feeling. It's like those Xerox machines, right? You go to the copy machine, you put your piece of paper in, it's got that bar of light that goes, right? That's what we're doing mentally. This bar of our attention just goes down our body. What's happening? What's happening in my shoulders? You can even do this right now. As I sit here, when I just did that, I noticed there's tension in my shoulders because my arms are up. There's tension in my shoulders. So if I just loosen my body and relax and just relax my muscles, I'm paying attention to my body. I'm tuning into what's happening here, not here, and I'm relaxing and allowing. By doing that, it allows this feeling to dissipate because I don't have to act on the feeling. If I see somebody at the grocery store who's attractive, I don't have to do anything with that. I do a quick scan. Where is this coming from? It's just an attractive person. I'm not coping with anything. I just see this person, visual cue, have this feeling. Okay, cool. What's happening in my body? Relax. I'm good. Just by paying attention to your body, the feeling can start to dissipate. Tool number 3, you interrupt the train of thought. That's kind of what I mentioned earlier. You take the flashlight of your attention away from the thought and put it on your body. Because the more you fantasize and visualize, the more those chemicals in your body get released. It's just where your attention goes, emotion will flow from that. So training yourself to quickly interrupt the thoughts. You see an attractive person. Your mind says, oh, she's really attractive. I wonder what interrupt. I wonder what she would interrupt. You're breaking the pattern by quickly interrupting the thought. You're not trying to suppress it. You're interrupting it to change your focus. You're not trying to run away from it. That does not work. It will never work. It's a matter of interrupting it by then choosing a new focus. I'll share with you a quick example. I was driving one of my kids to school, and I'm at a stoplight. I look over, and there's an attractive woman in the other car. And then my mind, again, picks up on that, notices that, my body has a reaction. She's attractive. And then it's very easy in that moment for a thought to pop in. In that moment, you have a decision point, right? Don't beat yourself up. It's a thought that came in that you didn't invite. It's not your fault that it's there. It just comes in. And so the goal is to interrupt that thought. And after lots and lots of reps, you're going to get good at that. So I'm practicing what I'm preaching. I reserve my sexual relationship with just my wife. So I'm practicing the same thing. Interrupt the thought. I see her, interrupt. No, I don't need to think about that. How I interrupted that was, I asked myself a new question. I said, what else in my environment is interesting? Just by asking that question, your brain starts to think about something else. So I'm not running away from this person next to me. I'm not saying, oh no, like she's there, not, she's wearing this thing that's, low cut, and it's just okay, I acknowledge. And then I ask myself, what else is interesting in the environment right now? Then I start scanning and looking around, like, what else is here? And I see this Tesla that has this weird, like, rainbow colored paint job. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I just let my attention be on the car. Very, very different than trying to suppress and avoid. It's just interrupt. I don't need to entertain that. I acknowledge she's attractive. That's okay. And what else is interesting? Redirect. And now I'm choosing to focus on something else. The last tool is you simply just channel this feeling into your relationship. If you have this normal, healthy sexual desire, then the goal is to be mindful. And if you're driving your kids on the way to school, if you're at work in a board meeting, if you're doing whatever you're doing, it may not be the right place and time to utilize or channel to act on that energy. So what you do is be mindful, allow that thought to just come and go, allow the feeling to come and go, and maybe you think, all right, tonight I'm going to initiate with my wife. I'm going to see if she's open to being intimate. So you're channeling that energy. You're not trying to suppress it and demonize yourself for having it. Oh, I got to cut this off. This is bad. It's just, I have this feeling. What do I want to do with it? I don't need to entertain that visual cue. I have this feeling. I would like to be intimate, or it's been a while. My body's just telling me it's been a while. You channel that to your relationship when the time is appropriate. So we've covered these 3 categories here. I hope this resonates with you. There are 3 categories that you can now start to use to identify where these urges are coming from. It's really helpful to have a reference point. And what happens is that when you start to do this, you see all these triggering situations, right? And I put this word triggering in quotes because now that you know, these are just associations. They're just messages your body's trying to send to you. There are maybe signals that there's an underlying, maybe painful emotion that needs attention. They're just messages. So you take all of these messages and you can put them into 3 simple categories. If I'm a mechanic and I see 50 different things on the dashboard and I'm not really good yet, I'm a new mechanic, I get overwhelmed. But if I can condense all of those into 3 little categories, now I can work with that. Now I can assess, where is this problem coming from? So in summary, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. If not, that's okay. On the replay, drop them in the chat and I can circle back around and answer questions in the comments. In summary, I hope that as you've listened along today, that you recognize that urges are okay to have. There's nothing wrong with you. It's normal. They're just messages. All we want to do is when we have an urge, do a quick assessment. What category is this coming from? How am I doing emotionally? What am I feeling? Am I overwhelmed? How is my day? Is my relationship okay? I'm just checking these different areas of my life on the emotional level. Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. Nothing's really wrong. I'm in a good spot. I'm not overwhelmed. Yes, I'm stressed, but I can handle it. I feel confident where I'm going. I know what to do. I feel good about me. Not trying to cope with anything. Is there like a habit? Is there an association? Well, maybe I'm home by myself and I just happened to walk in and I thought about it. Maybe it's just as a habit then. So you use the habit level tool to deal with the habit level issue. So you do a quick assessment, figure out where it's coming from, then you take the useful step to address it. Like I said earlier, instead of using a habit level solution to solve an emotional level problem, now that we've talked about this and you have a way to identify this, this is how you can actually solve the issue and find permanent freedom from overwhelming urges that keep pulling you back into doing things that you don't want to do. So a lot of people, when they're doing this work, it's in the beginning can feel overwhelming. And so some people, after I do presentations or after they hear my podcast, they want some extra help. So if that's you and you want me to walk you through the process and help you match the right tool for the right job, help you to identify where this is coming from, what is the root cause? Because once you know the root cause, it's simple. It's simple. It's literally just step by step. And a part of how you can get there is by identifying the root cause. But some people have a hard time with that. That's the most important step. And so if you are looking for some help, after having done this many, many times, I can guide you through the process. You don't have to do it by yourself. You're more than welcome to book a free call at the website there, stopporn.info. If you're interested, I'd be happy to support you guys. If not, no pressure at all, but this is just available for people who are looking for extra help. But if you're going to tackle this on your own, this is the blueprint. Guide yourself through this process. Coping, habit, normal physical drive. When you assess that, take the step to resolve the issue. Then by doing that and then learning the skills that you need to address the issue, that it's just skill building. Again, it's not a character defect. It's just skill building. So you can get there. And I'm 1,000% confident that you can find freedom from this. Again, this is a very different model than the more traditional way, which is you're going to have urges. Therefore, you have to manage them. Doesn't have to be like that when you resolve where they're coming from. So I hope this is helpful. Again, if there's any questions, drop them in the chat. I'm happy to respond to those after the fact. But that would be my encouragement. Do the scan, match it with the right tool, develop that skill, and then you'll notice the urges just the volume gets turned down more and more and more to the point where you're free and you really can live without this problem. So this is my blueprint going into 2025. I know a lot of people have goals. I would encourage you to make this your goal. Make it the goal to learn the skill. Not so much about your like sobriety counter. I'm going to go 90 days this time. I wouldn't even worry about the timeline. I would just make the goal, learn the skill. And by doing so, you can ultimately find this freedom. So I hope this is helpful. I appreciate you guys being here. It's a pleasure to be able to have the chance to share this with you. And if you need some help again, you're more than welcome to book a call. If you feel good about what we talked about and you want to apply it, start there. Take those steps. And I'd love to hear your feedback and to see how that's going for you and support you along the way. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We'll talk to you soon.